and welcome to this special Procurement Act podcast mini-series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. This series is supported by Procurement Hub. Hello, and thank you for joining us on this second episode of the CIPS Futures Procurement Act mini-series, partnered with Procurement Hub, part of Places for People. If you haven't already listened to the first episode, we had a fantastic overview from Lindsay McGuire from the Cabinet Office, who has been central to the work on the Procurement Act. With go live now due for February 2025, there's no better time to get under the skin of the expected impact. We'll do just that over the next 3 episodes, where we're once again joined by Alan Heron, and we're also lucky enough to be joined by Rebecca Rees. As a reminder, Alan joined us the last episode and is Director of Procurement at Places for People. Rebecca is partner and head of procurement at international law firm Trowers Hamlins. Rebecca is a leading national expert in public procurement law, consistently ranked as among the world's leading government contracts lawyers. So welcome both. Delighted to have you with us over the remainder of this series. This episode, we're going to be focusing on the Procurement Act's expected impact on transparency. Alan, if I can start with you, what do we mean by transparency? How can we just outline what the challenges have been with transparency in public sector procurement?
I think that one of the most important considerations of transparency within the Procurement Act is that it's multifaceted. Whilst the majority of the transparency obligations relate to contracting authorities and their procurement activities, they also relate to the supply chain and other parties such as framework providers, which is important to remember. The majority of the increased transparency will be delivered via a whole range of new contract notices contract authorities will be obligated to publish. It's also critical to note that the transparency isn't just restricted to the tendering activities of the contracting authorities, but also to the management and performance of the contracts once they're established. The Procurement Act makes it very clear that it regards contract management as part of the procurement process, and for the first time, it clearly expands the legislation to account for this. The new transparency requirements are trying to address gaps that previously existed. For example, suppliers were often asking contracting authorities for an indication of what their procurement plans were moving forward. That's now included in the form of an annual procurement pipeline notice, which will give visibility of contracting authorities' procurement exercises for the next 18 months. Additionally, there have been questions around the value for money performance for some public contracts. This will be addressed with the new contract performance notices, although they are restricted to contracts with a total value of £5 million or more at the moment. There are a significant amount of new notices mandated by the Procurement Act, assessing a valid desire for more transparency. But is this balance right? Have we got too many notices? Will we be inundated with so much information that it becomes overwhelming and we become snowblind to it? Time will tell.
Yeah, I think it's striking the balance, isn't it? It's I know that there's a greater wish and a necessity for more transparency, but are we going to tie ourselves up in knots, I guess? So, Rebecca, if I could come to you, what elements of the Act specifically relate to improving transparency?
There's a lot throughout the Act, as you can imagine, about transparency, and it, although it's not set as a principle or objective now in Procurement Act speak, in itself, what the Cabinet Office have said is that it is hard-baked through the Act. And in their document, the Transparency Ambition, the Cabinet Office has said, in their view, there's already a high level of transparency in UK public procurement. So putting on top of that, they want to expand the types of information that's reported on, improve the visibility of the data through common identifiers, the use of common data standards, and create a single platform through which all interested parties can access that data. And as you and Alan have alluded to, how are they going to do that? We have additional transparency notices now, and I think that there are 13 all in all serving different purposes under the Act. They've adopted the Open Contracting Data Standard to underpin all of the information that we're being asked to report on now. Clearly, there's ongoing transparency obligations into the commercial life cycle that we'll get onto. We have our award notifications still called assessment summaries, where bidders can find out who won the contract and if they were unsuccessful, why they didn't. And also, I suppose, in terms of transparency and potential challenges, we do have a much greater emphasis on early disclosure in any challenges or disputes and differences around procurement decisions as well. So a lot to be getting on with.
Yes. No, I think you're right, because transparency isn't something new that's come to public procurement, and fairness and transparency has always been at the heart of it. And I guess this is bringing more transparency to how transparent the process is, I guess, and in a more formalized way. Is there a specific reference to transparency being embedded throughout the contract life cycle, and how will this be achieved?
There's quite a bit in the Procurement Act now that we haven't seen before around embedding transparency through the commercial life cycle. So obviously we think that the Procurement Act covers the procurement process, but now we see not only through contract modifications, but through the transparency ambition, a lot more being embedded via the Procurement Act into the contract itself. So this is a new element that we're going to have to get to grips with. And I think speaking with colleagues like Alan, this is a new dimension to a procurement person's role that they will need to talk about with their internal client as to who takes this forward. Because what the Act now requires contracting authorities to do for above threshold contracts above £5 million, so that will be services and supplies contracts above £5 million, but works contracts above the works thresholds, which is slightly more than £5 million. They will have to report on at least 3 key performance indicators on an annual basis, and again at the termination of the contract. They will also need to more widely report on any payment above £30,000 made under a public contract. And report on their payment performance. So, as we know, public sector payment performance is 30 days from an undisputed invoice. And the Procurement Act provides an obligation for contracting authorities to report against how successful they've been in paying in accordance with that requirement as well. So, again, a really kind of intrusive level of transparency coming from procurement into the commercial life cycle. And of course, that ends with a transparency notice, which needs to be provided on the termination of the contract with out-turn information. And that's a termination notice isn't just where a contract has been terminated, it's where it's expired through the effluxion of time naturally in accordance with its term as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm interested, what do you think the motivation is for them to include this essential element in the Act?
I've heard the Cabinet Office talking about sunlight being the best disinfectant, i.e., you're more likely to comply with the rules if somebody can pick you up on it based on the information you put out there. My own personal view is that perhaps we wouldn't have gone on such a transparency overdrive had Jolly and Moorman, the chaps at the Good Law Project, not been so successful in challenging on a transparency ticket, particularly around contract award notices on the COVID procurement contracts and the challenges we subsequently saw there. I don't think the level of transparency that we have sits comfortably with the flexibility agenda. And I think it sort of relies on coherent, consistent declaration of information from contracting authorities. And you can really see that the success of the transparency agenda, regardless of its motivation, will depend on contracting authorities complying with the obligations to their fullest extent. Otherwise, we will get an unequal or unbalanced declaration of transparency across the procurement landscape, which again will not provide a sort of full and frank picture of procurement practice across the UK.
Yeah, no, and I guess it could have unintended consequences, because like you rightly say, there's been news stories over the last few years on public procurement spend, particularly around the COVID period. This will bring greater transparency, but with that will bring a greater spotlight for people to be held account to. Alan, moving on to you, what does this mean for procurement professionals in practice? What might they have to change in the current processes? How will they have to address this?
Well, where do we start, Emma? There's so many practical implications of delivering these objectives. I suppose the first is having good processes, documentations, and systems to support the data requirements of the Act. It's imperative to have robust processes in place, underpinned by a good understanding of the Act itself and its requirements, because the levels of transparency and scrutiny are going to be much higher than we've ever been subject to before. Rebecca may disagree, but from a practitioner's perspective, I would suggest that if these are not in place, then the risk of challenge will be significantly higher than it is under the current legislation. Some of the transparency obligations of the new Act will also mean that procurement professionals will have to ensure good relationships with other teams in their organisations, such as finance and operational teams dealing with suppliers, to assess the performance. This subsequently means an awareness of understanding of the transparency requirements of the Act beyond the procurement teams themselves and into the wider business, which will be something that wasn't readily enforced under the previous legislation. So there's lots of things to consider and lots of practical implications.
Rebecca, do you foresee challenges for practitioners and contracting authorities in adopting these new measures? Because, greater transparency requirements would surely result in increased administration burden.
Yeah, I agree with Alan on this one. Not only is there practically more notices to fill in, but also procurement officers who are often juggling numerous procurement processes need to understand what notices need to go in and when. And obviously that will require some sort of additional system so that flags are raised when notices need to be published. So I agree with Alan. I've seen a number of clients ask for and sometimes get additional resource, particularly to deal with the transparency agenda. On the other hand, I've heard some portal providers saying that actually the way they're setting up their Procurement Act processes should cut down the need to fill in duplicative information across the various notices. So I'm hoping that the use of technology will reduce the administrative burden on procurement officers individually. But as I said previously, I just don't think that this really enhanced transparency agenda, and the need to issue some transparency notices in terms of modifications and call-offs entirely chimes with the government's stated objectives. Because if you read the Transforming Public Procurement Green Paper back in December 2020, the summary of which said, we are removing red tape and preventing contracting authorities being bogged down in bureaucratic, process-driven procedures. And I think at least in that aim and objective, they've probably not achieved as much as they could have done due to the enhanced transparency obligations.
Yeah, it's these unintended consequences of these initiatives, I guess, isn't it? Alan, how would you advise practitioners who are listening in now to prepare for any changes they may need to implement to adopt more transparent procurement measures?
I think the first thing is have as good an understanding of the Act as possible. Undertake as much of the training and e-learning that's out there as you potentially can within your teams and in the wider businesses where that's appropriate. But similarly to Rebecca, I think technology is going to play a massive factor in delivering some of these obligations. I think, how does the organisation record and store its contractual information? Will it allow you to easily identify spend by contract? Will it allow you to receive notifications or reminders when contracts are due to expire, or when they reach an anniversary date and you may need to publish a contract performance notice? We'll need good technology to support our transparency obligations, as trying to do this manually just won't work in the long run. It will simply open yourself up to a multitude of problems. I think technology and the digitisation of procurement is is going to absolutely spearhead the success of the practical implications of this Act.
Absolutely, and a more holistic driven approach to it, I guess, because I've seen recently, we saw at Futures conference recently, some really great use of digital technology in the public sector, but I guess a consolidated approach to it would really help with this. So time will tell. Great, thank you both so much. Really great exploration there on the Procurement Act and what it means for transparency. Next up, we'll be talking about embedding greater professionalism and integrity into the procurement process. So that's it for this second episode of this series. We'll hope you're enjoying it so far and you'll join us for the rest of them. If you haven't already, do take a listen to our first episode with Lindsay Maguire from the Cabinet Office. And don't forget to listen into all our other CIPS Futures podcasts where we're interviewing leading minds and innovators in the profession. Thank you to Procurement Hub for supporting this CIPS Futures series. Part of Places for People, Procurement Hub are a commercially sensitive procurement consortium with giving back and social purpose at the forefront. This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on CIPS, head over to cips.org, where you can find out about our up-and-coming events and all the excellent training opportunities on offer. See you next time.